Welcome to Secrets of a Stolen Glance. Take a deep breath, let go of your worries, and allow yourself to unwind. If you're feeling the weight of stress or anxiety, this story is here to help you find peace and relaxation. Whether you're here to relax after a long day or drift into a peaceful sleep, I'm grateful you're spending this time with me. Feel free to close your eyes and let the soothing words wash over you as Kelly and Ryan's quiet connection unfolds in the heart of Western Queensland. What part of the story resonated with you the most? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for letting me be a part of your calm. The new arrival. The dry heat of the outback lingered well past sunset, wrapping Kelly like an invisible weight as she scrubbed her hands in the hospital's modest sink. It had been one of those days. Too many patients, not enough staff, and a deep gnawing in her stomach reminding her she hadn't eaten since breakfast. Still, she focused on her familiar routine: clean up, check her lists, and plan the evening ahead. Dinner, maybe a quick call to her parents, and then a long soak in the tub. Simple plans that helped quiet the anxious hum in her mind. The muffled buzz of voices in the hallway broke her focus. She caught snippets of excitement from her colleagues. "He's here! The new doctor!" A mix of relief and curiosity rippled through the air. Kelly dried her hands, sighing. "Bet he won't last a week," muttered one of the nurses, raising an eyebrow at Kelly as they passed her in the corridor. City boys never do. Before Kelly could respond, the city boy in question rounded the corner. Ryan was tall, with sandy brown hair that looked like it had been hastily brushed back, and he carried himself with an air of confidence that only just masked his unease. His shirt was slightly rumpled, and the small suitcase in his hand suggested he'd come straight from the airport. His eyes scanned the room briefly before landing on Kelly. It was just a glance, but something in it stopped her mid-step. A fleeting moment where her breath caught. Was it the exhaustion or something else entirely? She quickly looked away, but not before she noticed the corner of his mouth twitch into a polite, almost apologetic smile. "Dr. Ryan Harding," he introduced himself to the small group of staff gathered near the desk. His voice was steady but carried a hint of wariness, like he was trying to convince himself as much as everyone else that he was ready for this. Kelly lingered near the edge of the group, observing. Tess, her roommate and the hospital's veteran nurse, wasted no time in initiating introductions. "Well, doctor, welcome to the Outback. You're in for a treat or a trial, depends on the day." She gave a warm laugh, clapping him on the shoulder. As the team dispersed, Tess nudged Kelly. "He's not bad, huh? Think he'll survive?" Kelly shook her head with a soft chuckle. "Not sure yet. He might surprise us." Later, as Kelly packed her things and prepared to leave, she noticed Ryan standing near the window, staring out at the vast expanse of land that stretched to the horizon. He looked a little lost, but something about the quiet determination in his posture intrigued her. "Long day already?" she asked, startling him slightly. He turned, his eyes meeting hers again, this time lingering a second longer. "Not quite what I imagined, but I'll get there." She nodded, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at her lips. "Welcome to Western Queensland. It doesn't wait for you to adjust." As Kelly left the hospital, the unspoken curiosity between them lingered in her mind. She shook it off, focusing on her plans for the evening. Still, as she drove home under the sprawling stars, the memory of his glance stayed with her, sparking something she hadn't felt in a long time. The flood emergency. The rain began as a gentle patter on the tin roof of the hospital, almost soothing against the backdrop of a quiet afternoon. But by the time Kelly looked up from her paperwork, the sky had darkened, and sheets of rain were pelting the windows with a ferocity that made her stomach tighten. "Looks like a big one," Tess said, standing at the window with arms crossed. "The creek'll be over the bridge before nightfall." Kelly nodded, instinctively pulling her ponytail tighter. Floods weren't unusual in Western Queensland, but they always brought chaos. Within hours, the dirt roads would turn to rivers, cutting off the town from the outside world. People would panic, accidents would happen, and the hospital would become the lifeline for the entire region. By early evening, her fears were realized. The waiting room filled with wet, anxious faces, locals who had braved the deluge to seek help for everything from twisted ankles to a toddler with a high fever. Kelly moved between patients, trying to keep her own nerves in check. She had no time for her anxiety tonight. Ryan, however, looked visibly tense. His shirt sleeves were rolled up and his jaw was set as he treated a man with a deep cut on his forearm. His usual air of confidence had been replaced by a focused intensity. "Dr. Harding, can you take a look at this?" Kelly asked, gesturing to an elderly woman complaining of chest pain. He hesitated for a split second before nodding and following her to the next bed. The night wore on, and the rain didn't let up. Reports of rising waters began filtering in, roads were washed out, and families were stranded on higher ground. Then came the emergency call. A teenager had been pulled from the floodwaters unconscious. "We've got to stabilize him here," Kelly said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "Flying doctor can't get through in this weather." Ryan looked at her, wide-eyed but determined. "Tell me what you need." Together, they worked on the boy. Kelly's instructions were sharp and precise, and Ryan followed them with the efficiency of someone eager to prove himself. When the boy finally coughed up water and started breathing on his own, a collective sigh of relief swept through the room. "You did good," Kelly said quietly as they wheeled the boy to recovery. Ryan leaned against the wall, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I'm not sure I've ever been this exhausted." "Welcome to rural medicine," she replied with a wry smile. By the time the floodwaters began to recede, the hospital staff was running on fumes. Kelly caught Ryan sitting in the break room, staring into a cup of instant coffee like it might contain the answers to life's big questions. "Rough night?" she asked, dropping into the chair across from him. "Rougher than I expected," he admitted, meeting her eyes. "But it feels good, you know, knowing we made a difference." Kelly studied him for a moment, seeing past the polished exterior to the determination and vulnerability underneath. "You're a fast learner," she said. "This place might just suit you after all." Ryan chuckled, the sound soft but genuine. "Coming from you, I'll take that as high praise." As Kelly walked out into the damp morning air, her exhaustion was outweighed by something else, a flicker of respect and maybe even admiration for the city doctor who was proving he could handle the outback after all. A taste of the outback. The rhythm of rural life was unlike anything Ryan had ever experienced. Back in Brisbane, the hospital buzzed with a constant stream of activity, a predictable chaos. Here, the pace ebbed and flowed, lulling him into moments of calm only to throw him headfirst into unexpected emergencies. He stood outside the hospital, staring at the golden expanse of the horizon as the sun dipped low. The faint scent of eucalyptus hung in the warm air, mingling with the earthy aroma of red dust kicked up by passing utes. It was beautiful, he admitted to himself, but it felt like a world away from the one he knew. "Oi, city boy," Tess called from behind him, grinning as she approached. "You're not working late tonight. Kelly and I are dragging you to the pub." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "The pub?" "Yes, the pub," Tess said with mock exasperation. "It's a rite of passage. Every newcomer gets a proper outback welcome. You've survived a flood. Now it's time to see how we unwind." The pub was alive with laughter and the clinking of glasses. Locals greeted Kelly and Tess warmly, teasing Ryan with questions about how he was coping. A stocky man in a dusty Akubra patted him on the back. "You'll be right, mate. Just got to learn to drink beer that tastes like beer, not water." Ryan chuckled awkwardly, unsure how to respond. Kelly stepped in, rescuing him with a sly grin. "Be nice, Mick. He's been here a week, not a decade." As the night wore on, Ryan began to relax. The locals' teasing shifted into genuine friendliness, and he found himself laughing at their stories, wild tales of cattle mustering, flash floods, and emus invading gardens. Tess, as always, was the life of the party, regaling everyone with exaggerated anecdotes that had even Kelly doubling over in laughter. Ryan leaned closer to Kelly as the din around them grew louder. "Is it always like this?" "Not always," she said, her eyes sparkling in the dim light. "But when you live out here, you learn to make your own fun." Later that evening, Kelly led Ryan outside to the veranda where the noise of the pub faded into the background. The night was cool, and the stars shone brighter than Ryan had ever seen. "You seem more relaxed," Kelly said, leaning against the railing. "Yeah, well, your friends didn't give me much choice," he replied, his tone light but sincere. "I needed this, though. It's been a lot." Kelly tilted her head, studying him. It's not easy, is it? Leaving everything behind and starting fresh. Ryan's smile faltered. No, it's not. Back home, I felt like I knew what I was doing. Out here, I feel like I'm constantly playing catch-up, and the stakes are higher. People rely on you in a way they don't in the city. She nodded, her gaze thoughtful. It's true, but you're doing better than most would. That counts for something. Ryan hesitated, then asked softly, What about you? What brought you out here? Kelly looked away, her fingers tracing the edge of the railing. I needed a change. I've always loved helping people, but sometimes it feels like the more I give, the less I have left for myself. Tess keeps me grounded, though. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the weight of their unspoken struggles seemed to dissipate in the quiet understanding between them. You're tougher than you give yourself credit for, Ryan said, his voice low. Kelly smiled, a small, genuine curve of her lips. Maybe, but we'll see if you still think that after your first outback summer. They both laughed softly, the sound carried away by the breeze. As they headed back inside, the bond between them felt stronger, a tentative connection growing amidst the vast, unpredictable beauty of the outback. The Flying Doctor. The call came in just after dawn, the hospital's phone piercing the quiet with urgency. Kelly answered, listening as the dispatcher relayed the details. A single-car rollover on the outskirts of town. A young family was involved, and the injuries sounded serious. By the time Kelly hung up, her mind was already racing through protocols. She glanced at Ryan, who was pouring coffee in the break room. We've got a bad one, she said, grabbing her kit. The drive to the crash site was tense. The rain from last week's flood had left the dirt roads soft, and Ryan gripped the dashboard as Kelly expertly navigated the slippery terrain in her battered ute. You always drive like this? Ryan asked, half joking, though his knuckles were white. Only when I have to, Kelly replied, her eyes fixed on the road. You'll get used to it. When they arrived, the scene was sobering. The family's sedan lay on its roof, crumpled like paper. The parents were sitting by the roadside, dazed but conscious, while a toddler wailed in the arms of a paramedic. The driver, a teenage girl, was still trapped in the car, unconscious and bleeding heavily. Ryan followed Kelly's lead as they assessed the situation. The girl's condition was critical. Head trauma, a broken leg, and shallow breathing. Time was not on their side. We need to stabilize her before the Flying Doctor arrives, Kelly said, her tone steady. Ryan nodded, setting his nerves aside. What do you need me to do? Under Kelly's guidance, they worked with precision. Ryan inserted an IV line while Kelly monitored the girl's vitals. Sweat dripped down Ryan's temple as he focused, the enormity of the situation pressing down on him. When the Flying Doctor Services plane touched down on a makeshift airstrip, the medical team sprang into action. The doctor in charge quickly assessed their work and gave a curt nod of approval. Good job, he said. She's stable enough for transport, but just barely. Let's move. Kelly and Ryan helped transfer the girl onto a stretcher, their hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through them. As the plane's engine roared to life, Kelly stood on the edge of the airstrip, watching it disappear into the horizon. Back at the hospital, the weight of the morning began to settle. Ryan sat heavily in a chair, his head in his hands. That was intense, he said, his voice muffled. Kelly handed him a bottle of water and sat down across from him. It always is, but you handled it well. Ryan looked up, his expression conflicted. I didn't feel like I handled anything. You were the one keeping it all together. She shrugged. It comes with time. The first time's always the hardest. He studied her, seeing the quiet strength in her posture, the way she carried the burden of her work without complaint. How do you do it? Stay so calm. Kelly hesitated, then smiled faintly. You don't see the parts where I'm not calm, but you learn to focus on what needs to be done in the moment. The rest, you deal with later. For the first time, Ryan understood the depth of her experience, the quiet resilience that had drawn him to her from the beginning. Thanks for having my back, he said. Always, Kelly replied, her smile softening. We're a team now, remember? As the sun dipped lower in the sky, they sat in silence for a while, the hum of the hospital around them a reminder of the life they'd chosen and the lives they were working to save. Beneath the starlit sky, the hospital was finally quiet. the kind of stillness that came after a long, grueling day. Kelly leaned against the veranda railing, the cool night air brushing her skin as she looked up at the stars. Out here, far from the city lights, the sky seemed endless, a glittering canopy of silver and indigo. She heard the creak of the screen door behind her and turned to see Ryan stepping out, his tie loosened, and the exhaustion etched into his features. "Couldn't sleep?" Kelly asked, offering a small smile. "Didn't even try," Ryan replied, joining her at the railing. "Thought I'd clear my head first." They stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of crickets and distant cattle filling the space between them. "Rough day," Kelly murmured, breaking the quiet. Ryan exhaled, his breath visible in the cool air. "That's an understatement. I felt like I was chasing my tail all day, trying not to mess up." Kelly chuckled softly. "We've all been there. You're doing better than you think, Ryan." He glanced at her, his expression a mix of gratitude and self-doubt. "How do you do it, Kelly? Keep everything together?" She paused, tracing the grain of the wooden railing with her fingers. "I don't always. I struggle with anxiety more than I'd like to admit. Sometimes it feels like I'm carrying a weight I can't put down." Ryan looked at her, surprised by her honesty. "You? But you're so composed." Kelly laughed, a bitter edge to the sound. "Composed is just a good mask. Tess helps me keep my head above water. She's been through so much herself, but somehow she always knows what to say. She reminds me to breathe, to take things one step at a time." Ryan nodded, his gaze dropping to the ground. "I get that. I've been terrified of failing ever since I got here. Back in Brisbane, I felt like I had control, like I knew what I was doing. But out here, everything's different. I don't want to let anyone down." Kelly's hand brushed his, a small, reassuring gesture. "You're not letting anyone down, Ryan. You're learning, just like the rest of us." Their eyes met, the vulnerability in his expression mirrored in her own. The tension between them shifted, becoming something softer, warmer. "You're easy to talk to," Ryan said quietly. "Funny," Kelly replied, her lips curving into a half smile. "I was about to say the same about you." The conversation grew lighter as they shared stories under the stars. Kelly's tales of Tess's quirky advice and Ryan's mishaps during his first week in the outback. They laughed, the sound echoing into the night, until the space between them felt smaller, almost non-existent. Ryan hesitated, his hand lingering near hers on the railing. "Kelly." She turned to face him fully, her breath catching at the intensity in his gaze. Before she could overthink it, Ryan closed the distance between them, his lips brushing hers in a tentative kiss. It was gentle at first, a question rather than a statement. But as Kelly leaned into him, her fingers tangling in the fabric of his shirt, the kiss deepened, fueled by weeks of unspoken tension and shared moments. Later, they found themselves in Kelly's modest bedroom, the world outside forgotten. They shed their fears and inhibitions, losing themselves in each other beneath the moonlight streaming through the curtains. For a few hours, the weight they both carried was lifted, replaced by the comfort of connection and the promise of something new. As dawn crept into the sky, Kelly lay awake beside Ryan, her thoughts swirling. She knew their night together had changed everything. The bond between them was undeniable, but it also came with complications, ones she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Ryan stirred, his arm draping over her waist. "You okay?" he murmured sleepily. Kelly turned to him, offering a soft smile. "Yeah, I think so." In that moment, the future felt uncertain, but Kelly knew one thing for sure. She wasn't facing it alone anymore. The morning after. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the room. Kelly blinked against the light, her mind still heavy with the memories of the night before. Her heart beat a little too fast, her chest tight as she turned to face the empty space beside her. She could still feel the weight of Ryan's presence, the way his hands had held her, the warmth of his body pressed against hers. But as reality began to settle in, so did the overwhelming rush of guilt. What had they done? She pushed herself up into a sitting position, her hands shaking slightly as she ran them through her disheveled hair. This was a mistake. It could ruin everything, her work, their friendship, the delicate balance they had built. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, dragging her out of her spiral. She glanced at the screen. It was a message from Tess. "Tess, up yet? Need to talk. come grab some coffee." Kelly sighed, tossing the phone back onto the bed. She had hoped to find some clarity in solitude, but the weight of the night still hung heavy. Tess was waiting for her in the kitchen when Kelly finally emerged. The older woman leaned casually against the counter, an amused smile tugging at her lips as she sipped her coffee. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Tess teased. "Not that I blame you. Last night was pretty intense." Kelly winced. "I don't know what to think, Tess. I feel like I've just made everything complicated. What happens now?" Tess put down her cup, crossing the room to join Kelly at the table. "It's not the end of the world, Kel. You two are adults, and sometimes things just happen. It's natural to feel a little tangled up after. I can't afford to let things get messy. This isn't the city. It's a small town and we're co-workers. What if it changes everything? What if I've ruined our professional relationship?" Tess raised an eyebrow. "Is that what's really bothering you, or is it something else?" Kelly swallowed, not entirely sure how to answer. Tess had always known how to get to the heart of things. "I don't know," Kelly admitted, her voice tight. I don't know where I stand with Ryan now. We're both so new here, I don't want to jeopardize anything, but I also don't want to pretend like it didn't happen." Tess's expression softened, and she reached across the table, squeezing Kelly's hand gently. "You've spent so much time trying to take care of everyone else. Maybe it's time you took care of you. Think about what you want, not just what might happen next." Kelly looked at her, the advice sinking in slowly. It wasn't the answer she was expecting, but maybe it was the one she needed. "You've got to stop carrying everyone else's worries on your shoulders," Tess continued. "You deserve to be happy too. Whatever happens with Ryan, you'll figure it out. Just don't overthink it." Kelly nodded, grateful for Tess's steady presence. "I'll try. I just need a little time." Meanwhile, Ryan sat in the small break room of the hospital, trying to make sense of his own tangled emotions. The previous night had been a blur of sensations, of connecting with Kelly in a way he hadn't expected, passionate, vulnerable, and undeniably real. But now, in the light of day, the consequences loomed large. He had always been cautious, wary of mixing his personal and professional life. But out here, in this isolated town, things felt different. The connection he felt with Kelly was undeniable, but what if it was only temporary? What if it was a mistake? He sighed, running his fingers through his hair. He didn't want to make things awkward, but he couldn't ignore the uncertainty now. As the day wore on, Kelly and Ryan found themselves exchanging only brief glances, the distance between them more palpable than it had been the day before. Kelly was doing her best to avoid him, her usual warmth replaced by a cool professionalism. Ryan understood, but it didn't make it any easier. By late afternoon, Ryan made a decision. He would give Kelly the space she needed, let her process everything in her own time. It wasn't easy, but he knew that rushing things would only make it harder. As Kelly walked past the break room, he caught her eye, his expression soft and understanding. "Hey, Kelly," Ryan said quietly, his voice almost hesitant. Kelly paused, her stomach flipping with nerves. "Hi. I just wanted to say that I think we both need to take a step back and figure things out. I'm not going anywhere, but I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable." Kelly nodded, her heart heavy with gratitude and disappointment all at once. "I appreciate that, Ryan. I really do." Ryan gave a small, almost rueful smile. "Take care of yourself, okay?" Kelly returned the smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "You too." And with that, they went their separate ways, the silence between them stretching wider than it had before. A community in crisis. The air felt heavier than usual, thick with the smoke of a bushfire that was rapidly approaching the outskirts of town. The sun had turned a dull orange, shrouded by the haze, and the sky was streaked with the pinkish glow of flames licking at the horizon. Kelly stood at the entrance of the clinic, eyes squinting against the smoky air as she surveyed the landscape. She could hear the faint crackle of radio chatter, the voices on the other end trying to coordinate evacuation plans. The tension was palpable. Residents of the small town were being urged to prepare to leave if necessary, but most of them were too proud to go, clinging to their homes as the fire crept ever closer. "Kelly, we've got a situation," Tess called from the clinic's doorway, her voice sharp with urgency. Kelly turned quickly, instinctively moving toward the sound of Tess's voice. Inside, the clinic had come to life in the chaos, nurses rushing between patients, phone calls coming in from concerned families, and the steady hum of alarms. "What's happening?" Kelly asked, slipping into her work mode despite the gnawing anxiety threatening to take hold. "We've got a family of 4 coming in. The father has burns, nothing too serious, but the young boy, his asthma's flaring up from the smoke. It's pretty bad." Kelly felt a jolt of worry shoot through her, but she pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. "Get the oxygen ready and prepare a bed. I'll be with them shortly." Tess nodded, already moving to prepare the space. Kelly grabbed her medical bag, her thoughts racing. The smoke had already begun to choke the air, and the danger of the fire was becoming increasingly real. The boy's asthma could easily worsen, his small body struggling to breathe against the thick haze. The last thing they needed was another critical case. Within minutes, the clinic doors burst open and the family rushed in, father carrying his son, whose small frame was slumped against his shoulder, barely conscious. His wheezing was audible even from across the room. Kelly's heart tightened as she approached them, moving quickly to assess the situation. "Put him on the bed," she instructed, her voice steady despite the rising sense of urgency in her chest. The father placed his son down carefully, his face drawn with worry. Kelly immediately moved into action, checking the boy's vitals. "He's struggling to breathe," Kelly noted, her fingers brushing over the boy's chest as she felt his labored breaths. She glanced up at Ryan, who had just entered the room. He looked tense but ready to help. "I need an inhaler and nebulizer," Ryan ordered, his voice authoritative but calm. Kelly moved quickly to gather the necessary equipment, her hands working with precision as she prepared the nebulizer. She could see Ryan was already in full doctor mode, quickly assessing the boy's condition. "We're going to need to get this under control fast," Ryan added, his brow furrowed as he looked at the boy. Kelly nodded, already administering the inhaler under his instruction. The father held his son still, his hands trembling as he watched his son's labored breaths. Kelly could see the panic in the father's eyes, but she focused on the task at hand, administering the medication with steady hands. Ryan moved closer, his voice low but urgent. "Kelly, the oxygen. We need to get that on him immediately. We can't risk the airways closing any further." She responded immediately, setting up the oxygen mask and carefully placing it over the boy's nose and mouth. The boy's breathing began to settle, and slowly his color returned to a more natural tone. "His breathing's improving," Kelly noted, relieved but still cautious. Ryan stepped back, glancing at the father. "He's stabilized for now. We'll need to keep monitoring him. Once the fire is under control, we can consider transport, but for now, we stay put." The father let out a shaky breath of relief, and Kelly felt a small weight lift from her shoulders. The hours that followed were filled with a flurry of activity. The clinic had become a makeshift war zone, with people arriving from all over the town, some with burns from the fire, others suffering from smoke inhalation. Kelly worked tirelessly alongside Ryan, following his instructions as he made quick decisions to keep things under control. The chaos was relentless, but Kelly found herself operating on instinct, trusting in Ryan's steady leadership. By evening, the fire had been contained on the outskirts of town, but the after-effects were still being felt. Kelly collapsed into a chair in the break room, her back aching, her hands still trembling slightly from the stress of the day. Ryan followed her in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He set one in front of her, his eyes still holding that quiet intensity. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer now, a stark contrast to the chaos of the day. Kelly took the cup, her fingers brushing his as she did. "Yeah, I'm good. Thanks for everything today, Ryan." He smiled, a small, almost shy smile that made her heart flutter unexpectedly. "We make a good team." She nodded, her gaze meeting his. "Yeah, we do." And for a moment, in the midst of the exhaustion, the stress, and the lingering danger outside, Kelly allowed herself to feel something more, something deeper than just a professional bond. Beneath the surface. Kelly had always prided herself on her ability to stay composed in high-pressure situations. But today, the weight of everything, the stress of the past few weeks, the demanding patience, and the unspoken tension with Ryan, was finally beginning to take its toll. The hospital was bustling as usual, but for Kelly, the noise seemed to grow louder with each passing minute. The ringing phones, the chatter of staff, the cries of patients. It was all starting to blur into a cacophony she couldn't escape. She moved through the hallways mechanically, her hands shaking slightly as she adjusted an IV drip for an elderly woman in room 3. Kelly had been at the hospital for hours, moving from one patient to the next, her mind never fully able to focus. Every time her thoughts wandered, they always seemed to circle back to Ryan, his steady presence, the way he made quick decisions, and the unspoken connection that had been building between them. She paused at the woman's bedside, feeling a sudden dizziness wash over her. Her breath hitched, and she tried to steady herself, but the feeling only worsened. The world around her began to spin. The walls of the hospital seemed to close in on her. The beeping machines grew louder, as though amplifying her growing sense of panic. She tried to breathe, to calm herself, but it was like trying to hold back a tidal wave. A wave of nausea hit her next, and she stumbled backward, her legs suddenly weak. "Kelly?" It was Tess's voice. Kelly didn't even realize she'd closed her eyes until she felt Tess's hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "Breathe with me," Tess said gently, her voice grounding Kelly in the chaos. Kelly took a shaky breath, but it wasn't enough. She felt trapped, like the pressure of everything had finally overwhelmed her. I can't do this," Kelly whispered, her voice trembling. Hey, Tess said firmly, her hands now gripping Kelly's arms, pulling her into a supportive hug. "You don't have to do this alone, okay? You've been pushing yourself too hard, and it's okay to ask for help." Kelly's chest tightened and the panic rose once more, but Tess's words pierced through the fog in her mind. It was true. Kelly had been carrying the weight of so many responsibilities, at the hospital with her own anxiety, and the complicated unresolved feelings she had toward Ryan. Tess was right. She didn't have to do it alone. Tess continued to guide her through deep, controlled breaths, her voice a steady anchor in the storm. Slowly, the pressure on Kelly's chest started to ease, and her breath came easier. "I'm sorry," Kelly whispered, the shame of her breakdown creeping in. "There's nothing to apologize for," Tess said, her grip on Kelly loosening as she gave her space. "You're human, Kelly. You can't keep carrying everything by yourself." Kelly nodded, still shaky but beginning to regain some composure. The world didn't feel quite as suffocating anymore. Tess gave her a soft smile, then glanced around the hallway. "I'll take over here. You go grab a break, okay? I've got things covered." Kelly was hesitant, but Tess's expression was firm, reassuring. She couldn't deny the weight of the last few weeks, and Tess was right. She needed a moment to breathe. She gave her a small nod before stepping away, moving toward the staff room, where she hoped she could find some peace. Inside the staff room, Kelly sat on the couch, her hands still trembling as she tried to steady her breath. She closed her eyes, trying to calm her mind, but it was hard to shake the feeling of vulnerability that lingered. She hadn't expected to be joined by Ryan. She hadn't heard him come in, but now, there he was, standing in the doorway, concern etched across his face. "Kelly?" he asked gently, his voice carrying an undertone of worry. She didn't answer immediately, her chest still tight as she struggled to collect herself. Ryan stepped inside, quietly closing the door behind him. He crossed the room slowly, carefully, and sat down next to her on the couch, offering her a comforting presence. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said softly, his tone hesitant. I heard what happened, and I wanted to check on you." Kelly finally opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. She didn't want to burden him with her problems, not when she wasn't even sure she had the strength to explain herself. "I'm fine," she lied, her voice small. Ryan shook his head, a quiet determination in his eyes. "No, you're not. You're carrying too much, Kelly. I've seen it, and I admire how hard you work, but you don't have to do it all by yourself." Kelly's heart skipped a beat. There was something in his voice, something more than just concern, that tugged at her. "I've noticed how much you've been shouldering, and I don't want you to feel like you're alone in this. I'm here for you, Kelly," Ryan said, his voice more open now, more vulnerable than she'd ever heard it. Kelly swallowed hard, the weight of his words hitting her in a way she hadn't expected. She felt the familiar stirrings of emotion, the connection she'd been trying to ignore, growing stronger. Ryan, He placed a hand gently on hers, stopping her before she could continue. I'm not asking you to talk about it if you're not ready. I just want you to know that I'm here, whatever you need. I've got your back. Kelly felt her breath hitch again, but this time it wasn't from panic. It was the depth of the unspoken support in his words, the steady reassurance that she wasn't alone. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ryan gave her a soft smile, his thumb brushing gently over her hand. Anytime, Kelly. You don't have to carry it all. For the first time in what felt like weeks, Kelly let herself relax, just a little. The weight wasn't gone, but in that moment, it didn't feel as heavy with Ryan by her side. A leap of faith at the B&S ball. The night of the B&S ball arrived like a storm, filled with excitement, anticipation, and the unmistakable hum of country music that reverberated through the town. The hospital staff had all traded their scrubs for boots and formal wear, and even the most serious of the town's locals had shaken off their usual reserve, ready to let loose. The hall where the ball was held was alive with colour. Bunting draped from every corner, fairy lights twinkling against the dark sky, and tables crowded with food and drinks. The air was thick with laughter and the sound of clinking glasses, as men in checked shirts and women in flowing dresses danced, laughed, and sang along to the live band that had been brought in for the occasion. For Kelly, it was a welcome escape from the usual pressures of work. The hospital had been busy lately, and she hadn't realized how much she needed a break until now. But even in the midst of the revelry, her mind kept returning to Ryan. There was a pull between them that had been growing ever since that fateful night when they'd shared something far more than just professional respect. Kelly caught sight of him across the room, looking every bit the part of a country doctor in his shirt and jeans. Ryan's usual air of calm had given way to something more relaxed, a smile on his face as he laughed with some of the town's farmers. Tess, ever the observant friend, had given Kelly a knowing smile when they'd first walked in, nudging her to get out on the dance floor and enjoy the night. But Kelly couldn't ignore the flutter in her chest as she watched Ryan mingle, a part of her feeling like she was still waiting for something. The question of whether Ryan truly felt the same, whether they could take that next step together, hung in the air between them, unspoken. After a few more songs, Kelly found herself at the bar, nursing a drink and lost in her thoughts. The night had been beautiful, but something was missing, something that had been building inside her for weeks. She wanted to take the next step with Ryan, to stop pretending that the quiet moments they shared in the hospital or on the veranda didn't mean something. Ryan appeared at her side, his tall figure cutting through the crowd. He smiled at her, his blue eyes warmer than usual, and for a moment everything else seemed to fade. The noise, the people, it was just the two of them. "You look stunning," he said, his voice low but sincere. Kelly felt her cheeks flush, and for a moment she didn't know what to say. "Thanks," she finally managed, feeling a nervous flutter in her stomach. "You don't look too bad yourself." Ryan chuckled, running a hand through his hair. "How's your night been so far?" "Good, actually. I didn't realize how much I needed this," Kelly said, taking a sip of her drink. "It's been a lot lately, with work, the fire, and everything else." She paused, glancing down at the glass in her hand. Ryan nodded, his gaze softening. "Yeah, it's been a whirlwind for both of us, but tonight we can just enjoy it." He reached out and gently took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "I'm glad you came." Kelly smiled up at him, her heart racing. "I almost didn't," she admitted, the weight of her emotions suddenly catching up with her. "I've been scared, Ryan, scared of what this could mean between us." Ryan's expression shifted, his eyes locking onto hers with intensity. "Kelly," he began, his voice serious but filled with tenderness. "I've been scared too, scared of making things complicated, but I can't deny how I feel about you." Kelly's breath caught in her throat. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for, and yet her heart was pounding in her chest like it was trying to escape. She squeezed his hand, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Could she take this leap of faith? Could she trust what they had? "You're not alone in this, you know," Ryan continued, his voice softening. "I'm here. Whatever happens, I'm here." For a moment, Kelly stood there, absorbing his words, feeling the truth of them settle deep within her. This wasn't just about the wild chemistry between them, it was about trust, about letting go of the past and embracing the future. "I want this," Kelly finally said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "I want us to be more than just this thing we've been dancing around." Ryan's face broke into a smile, and he stepped closer to her, his hand still holding hers. "Then let's make it official," he said, his eyes sparkling with affection. Without thinking, Kelly leaned in, her heart soaring as she closed the space between them. The kiss was slow at first, tentative, like testing the waters, but it quickly deepened, the years of tension and unsaid words melting away. They were no longer just two people sharing a professional bond. They were something more, something real. As they pulled away, Ryan's forehead rested against hers, his breath warm against her skin. "I've wanted this for a long time," he whispered, "more than I've let on." Kelly smiled softly, her heart full. "Me too." The night continued around them, but in that quiet moment amidst the noise and revelry, Kelly and Ryan had found something real, something solid. They knew there would be challenges ahead, but they were ready to face them together. With the town celebrating around them, they felt like they were stepping into a new chapter, one where they no longer had to hide their feelings. As they returned to the dance floor, hand in hand, Kelly couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. The B&S ball had marked a turning point, not just for the town, but for her and Ryan. It was a leap of faith, yes, but one that felt more like the beginning of a journey rather than the end of something. And for the first time in a long while, Kelly felt sure of where her heart belonged. A new chapter. The sun hung low in the sky as Kelly and Ryan drove down the dusty road leading out of town, the world around them vast and empty, a stark contrast to the whirlwind of the past few months. The hustle and bustle of the hospital, the fires, the flood, and all the emotional roller coasters in between felt like a distant memory as the landscape unfolded before them, bathed in the soft golden light of the late afternoon. They had decided to take a short trip into the outback, a break from everything, a chance to breathe and reflect. Ryan had insisted on driving with the windows down, letting the warm breeze whip through the car. Kelly felt a sense of relief in the simplicity of the moment, the stillness of the land offering a rare sense of calm. She had come to appreciate the quiet that life in the outback provided, a peace she had never known in the busy streets of the city. "Not bad, huh?" Ryan's voice broke through her thoughts as he glanced at her with a smile. Kelly returned the smile, feeling a warmth that wasn't just from the sun. "It's incredible, so different from the hospital." Ryan chuckled softly. "Yeah, it's not exactly the same as the chaos of a medical emergency, is it?" Kelly shook her head, her eyes flicking to the endless horizon that stretched out before them. "But it's what I need right now. Just a change of pace." They reached their destination, a small, cozy cabin nestled at the edge of a small creek. The air was fresh and clean, filled with the scent of eucalyptus and earth. It was far from luxury, but it was just what they needed. Quiet, solitude, and a chance to reconnect. After unpacking, they took a walk along the creek, the sound of the water trickling over rocks a soothing backdrop to their conversation. Ryan's hand brushed against hers, a small but significant gesture that made Kelly's heart flutter. It felt natural now, the connection between them, and as the day turned to night, Kelly found herself looking at Ryan in a way she hadn't before. There was no rush, no pressure, just the two of them, experiencing the simplicity of being together. That evening, they sat by a small campfire, the stars emerging above them like a blanket of diamonds. The crackling fire was the only sound, apart from the occasional rustling of the wind through the trees. They talked for hours, about everything and nothing, the kind of conversation that flowed effortlessly when you felt safe with someone. Ryan looked at Kelly, his expression thoughtful. "You know, I never thought I'd end up here, in this small town, doing this kind of work." Kelly raised an eyebrow. "You're not exactly the country type, are you?" Ryan laughed softly, the sound rich and full of genuine amusement. "Not really. I thought I'd be working in a big city hospital, making a name for myself. But I don't know, this place, these people, it feels like home in a way." Kelly's heart warmed at his words. "I feel the same way. When I first came here, I thought it would just be a stepping stone. But now, it feels like this is where I'm meant to be. Ryan turned to her, his eyes softening as he took a deep breath. I'm glad you're here, Kelly. I don't think I would have made it through everything without you. Her heart swelled at his words, and for a moment, she wasn't sure what to say. She had spent so long running from her own emotions, but with Ryan, it felt like everything was finally coming into focus. I'm glad I'm here too, but I don't know what comes next. Ryan smiled a little wistfully as he reached out to gently touch her hand. You're not the only one with questions, but we don't have to have all the answers right now. We just need to know that we're in this together. Kelly's breath caught in her throat at the sincerity in his voice. She had spent so much time fighting against her own fears and insecurities, but in this moment, she knew something had shifted. They had been through so much, together and apart, but now there was nothing standing in the way of their future. What if I told you I'm ready for whatever comes next? She asked, her voice steady but full of emotion. Ryan's eyes sparkled in the firelight, his smile widening as he squeezed her hand. I think I'd be relieved, he said, his voice low and earnest. Kelly leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder as the warmth of the fire and his presence wrapped around her like a safety blanket. They were far from having everything figured out, but for the first time, Kelly felt like she didn't need to. She was exactly where she needed to be, with the person she was meant to be with. As the fire burned down to embers, Kelly and Ryan sat in comfortable silence, the night stretching out before them. They didn't need words to know that this was just the beginning, a new chapter in both their lives. They had faced the storm together, and now they were ready to take on whatever the future held. With Ryan by her side, Kelly finally felt like she had found a place of peace, a place where her heart could settle. The anxiety, the doubt, the fear that had once consumed her were slowly fading away, replaced by the quiet certainty of love. And in that moment, under the vast starry sky, Kelly knew that she was home, not just in the town but in her life, with the man who had become her everything. Thank you so much for joining me and making it to the end of Secrets of a Stolen Glance. I truly appreciate you taking this time to relax and unwind with me. I hope the story brought you some peace and comfort and helped ease any stress or anxiety you may have been carrying. Remember, you deserve these moments of calm. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more. Wishing you a restful, peaceful night ahead. Take care and be kind to yourself.